Do we? I do, We argue about this whole subject. And so we sometimes have got these mental barriers towards helping people in need. And I know we've got these barriers because I've got them. I have to admit that. I have barriers in my mind. Someone got a cell phone here? My wife doesn't seem to have too many barriers about helping people in need. But, I struggle with this whole thing. And so I know that I've got barriers at times in my mind and in my emotions. There's barriers there about kind of being reluctant sometimes to step out of my comfort zone and walk towards people who are in need. I had to face this some years ago because it was like God put me right in a situation where I had to face it. I had to take a food parcel one day to a guy in Glenfield when I was at Glenfield. I vowed afterwards I'd never take another food parcel to somebody, And I got really angry with this guy when I took this food parcel to him. And I was driving home and I was having this real heated argument with God, And I said to God, this guy did not deserve any help, And I can point to the spot on the road in Birkdale Road where I felt God whisper straight back into my heart and said, who said he deserved it? Who said he deserved it? Isn't giving to the needy grace? That's what grace is all about. Now, actually didn't really help me too much to be kind of more compassionate about this guy, In fact, when I got back to church, I said to the people back there, don't ask me to give any more food parcels, because it really raised something up inside of me, which I kind of didn't like, Here's a pastor who's kind of very reluctant and angry about giving out sort of stuff to people, So I know what barriers are like. I still struggle with those kind of barriers. And some of you will have those barriers. And we argue about it, we discuss it, but we don't do anything. We just don't step out and help people. And so an important step, actually, and having a change of attitude towards the neglected people in our society is actually for us to be honest about what triggers off this stuff inside of us. What is it that triggers off your arguments about the poor or the needy or the neglected? Does it trigger anything off, or you just one of these people who've got this compassionate heart for people? And so I want to challenge you, as I challenge myself here, face up to these barriers that we have. And over the 7 weeks, just to really submit this to God and say, God, I need to repent. And some of the barriers that we've got, we need to repent of them. And say, God, I want to lay these down so that I can get something of your heart for the neglected people of our society. And really ask God to give us his heart for it. So that's the first thing I want to challenge you about, is our attitudes. Secondly, I want to challenge you about your actions towards the neglected in our society. How are you involved in helping others? Some of you have been involved with Christian Community Care, CCC, and a significant number of people in this church are involved down at, what road? Kays Road, yeah. I had a mental block there. Kays Road. I mean, some of you spend a huge amount of time caring for family members or neighbours who are in need. And you just reach out and you do it. You're caring for people. And some of you are great at it, It's really great to see it. But again, there are many of us who keep our distance from people who are in need or the neglected people of our community. And during this series, the thing that we really are asking God to help us with is, what step do I need to take to action something towards helping somebody or someone else? Now, all of us are at different stages in this, but what step is it that God's wanting you to take? What's the next step for you in helping others? Diane and I were down in Morrinsville last weekend at the Morrinsville Baptist Centenary celebrations. Now, Morrinsville was the first church that Diane and I pastored. Way back in 1978 we started there. And we had a fantastic time in this church. It was, just really a special time to begin ministry, actually, in a church like that. It was really fantastic. So it was great to go back and meet up with all these people that we were involved with. In fact, one of the highlights for me was we had an unofficial meeting on the Saturday morning of our leadership team that we had together for most of the time that we were there. And I was really interested looking back. Di and I were just 30 when we started out there. And when we looked at the age of our leadership team, virtually all of us were in our 30s or early 40s. We had a young leadership team, and we had nobody sort of way up here. You know, we were all virtually the same. And so we grew tremendously together. It was a very special time. And when I look back on it, actually I'm diverting away from what I was going to say, but it doesn't matter. I like reminiscing. I'm getting old. I can reminisce, you know. But, you know, out of that leadership team, we had 5 couples who ended up going into full-time Christian work. I know it was really because it was such a special time in our growth together. So it was really great. Anyway, getting back to the point of my story, I had this guy tap me on the shoulder, and he said, "Hi, Maurice." And he had a scruffy old beard on his face, and a real scruffy kind of guy. He said, "You probably don't recognise me, but I'm Philip." As soon as he said, "I'm Philip," I knew who this guy was. When we were in Morrisville, he was a 20-year-old who'd come from a terribly abused background and had left huge scars on this young guy's life. Now, we had in the church at that stage a guy who was a big-hearted guy who took this guy under his wing, and his family basically adopted Philip. And this guy tried to help Philip. You know, he's tried to teach him how to change his clothes so he didn't smell so much, and, you know, basic hygiene stuff, and tried to help him to get a job. But the problem with Philip was he'd been so abused that he always had to argue everything. So when the boss asked him to do anything, he would debate with the boss whether he should do it or how he should do it and all. So guess what the boss would do? He'd send him down the road, you know. And so Philip could never hold down a job because he always wanted to argue with the boss, you know. Now, the son of this guy, the big-hearted guy, his son was at the centenary. And I got talking with him, and he said, "You know, Philip still rings us up. He's still part of the family." But he said with a smile, he said, he still can't hold down a job, you know. But I know that if this family hadn't reached out to help Philip and taken him under the wing and really adopted him, Philip would have been a menace to society, and he would have been one of those candidates who would have ended up in prison. No doubt about it. He was an angry, cross, lost guy, you know. And I was so thrilled to meet this guy because he was the last guy that I expected to meet at a Baptist centenary. And here he was, with a scruffy old beard on. "I'm Philip." Man, I was so thrilled to see him. You know, he's still, there as a Christian, even if he can't hold down a job. You know, this family saved that guy from ending up being an absolute mess as an individual. And you know, you and I don't know the impact we can have on people if we reach out to help somebody and bring them in, as it were, under our umbrella of just caring and supporting people like that. Now, the objective of this series that we're doing is not for us to beat ourselves up because we're not doing this very well, because some of you are actually doing it very well. But the objective is for each of us to sit before God and say, "God, what is the next step for me? What's the next step for me in me caring for others?" And I want to challenge you to do that over this series. Third area that you'll be challenged on in this series is your affluence. Now, by the standards of the world, we live in a very rich, materialistic society here in New Zealand. I mean, we live in a fantastic country. You know, I don't know why we complain so much, really, but we do. We just live in an absolutely fantastic, wonderful country that we live in here. They say that there is 2.6 billion people who live on less than $2 a day in our world. That's staggering, isn't it, when you think about that? 2.6 billion. And they actually reckon that number is now starting to drop, which is very good news. But it's a colossal number of people. There are just huge needs in our world.